Well, good evening everyone, and welcome to yet another edition of Stories of the Dark on your Wednesday. I am Glen Clark, your host, and tonight we're going to be talking about mental illness versus demonic possession. It's kind of a split topic there. Since September is Mental Health Awareness Month, I thought I would do a program on that and kind of leave it up to you to decide which you think is which. As always, start off the program. You can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I also have SoundCloud, so you can go to my SoundCloud page and check out all my videos there. I think I've got like 4 or 5 different shows up right now. So to start off the program, though, I want to do it on kind of a, kind of a lighthearted note. Little story that my producer girlfriend, BlakCircleGirl, found for me earlier today. It's about a 106-year-old man who broke the Guinness World Record for riding a zip line. So I'm going to read that to you. It's from the website educateinspirechange.org. So, 106-year-old Jack Reynolds, a great-grandfather, England, recently broke the Guinness World Record for the oldest person to ride a zip line. Reynolds broke the record last week while celebrating his 106th birthday. Reynolds has made a habit of doing interesting things for his birthdays and has ended up in the Guinness Book of World Records in the process. Reynolds is also on record as being the oldest person to get a tattoo, which happened on his 104th birthday, and the oldest person to ride a roller coaster on his 105th. Reynolds took the publicity surrounding the event as an opportunity to raise money for various charities. His daughter Jane told Metro he just decided to use his old age to make money for charity. That's his main motive, but in the meantime, he is getting a lot of fun out of it. It has become somewhat of a tradition that on my birthday I use my new age to help raise money for worthy charities. I think that's really good that at his age he can actually still do things like that, and of course we do wish him many more years that he has left of doing stuff like that. So, a little internet problem going on here. I was about to end up closing up all my links here. So anyway, to start off the program, I was going to take a break, but since my internet wants to be temperamental, I think we'll play a quick YouTube video for you on, it's called Ask the Exorcist. How can you tell the difference between mental illness and demonic possession? And I'll come back and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Here we go.
A lady who wishes to remain anonymous, living in the state of Colorado where I lived much of my life, asks this interesting question. How can you tell the difference between mental illness and demons? Can deliverance be done on a person who has been diagnosed by psychiatrists with several mental disorders? This is one of the most frequent questions that I get. And I refer people to my books where I've written about this extensively, particularly our book Dealing with Demons and our book on curse breaking. The book on Jezebel also touches on this just a little bit. The place where you're going to find the most information on this is our International School of Exorcism, where I have several courses teaching about the various schools of psychological thought, the various kinds of mental illnesses, and the intersection between these mental illnesses and demons and the necessity of deliverance. Now, fundamentally, you need to understand that a person can be mentally ill and have demons. A person can have demons and not be mentally ill. Also, a mental illness can be a behavioral phenomenon that has nothing to do with any generation demonically. However, sometimes evil spirits do cause mental illness. And many times in an exorcism, we encounter demons whose assignment it is to make the person mentally ill. Now, sometimes they're just exploiting a pre-existing condition, or sometimes they are the condition. For example, I have dealt with demons. Their name, their assignment, their designation is depression, schizophrenia, bipolar. And when the demon is cast out, the person's mind returns to normalcy. In other words, there was an overlay of mental illness because of a demon which was causing it. Now, I need to say to this individual, the majority of cases which we encounter are a combination. Now, oftentimes, there has been a pre-existing condition of a mental disorder that is then utilized by the demon to make the person worse, or the demon hides behind the mental illness. Now, it's very difficult sometimes to minister to someone who has a mental illness, and medication is one of the issues. Often, without some proper medication, their mind is not rational enough so that you can communicate with them and, for example, lead them in curse-breaking prayers and get them to understand the spiritual dimension of inner healing ministry. On the other hand, if there's too much medication, it can put them into a place of stupor. It can lower their emotional responses. And because demons are emotional beings, they respond through the emotions of the person. So to deal with the demons, which may be there, is very difficult. Sometimes people come to me, and it's very clear from their profile, from their background, and everything I find out about them, that there is a strong possibility of demonization. But I can't get to the demons because they are so zoned out on the medication that it's impossible for me to be able to arouse the spirits to a state of manifestation. This is one of the most challenging areas of ministry. I can tell you, name a psychiatric disorder, name something that's in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Psychologists, and I've encountered it and seen deliverance, healing, and freedom. I've seen it instantly. But more often, it's quite a progressive road that one must walk with the mentally disturbed individual. Please consider enrolling in our International School of Exorcism, where I teach in detail for many hours on this subject, and you'll have a much better grasp of what can and cannot be done to minister to the needs of people who are suffering mentally and to see them healed and set free in the name of Jesus. The most frequent demon that I deal with is the spirit of Jezebel, the most prevalent evil spirit of our age. This demon wants to destroy your health, your finances, your marriage, your family, and your church. Learn the tactics of Jezebel throughout history and in the time in which we live. My book, Jezebel, Defeating Your Number One Spiritual Enemy, is your key to overcoming this demon, which is more prevalent than at any time in human history. Get your copy today. Jezebel, Defeating Your Number One Spiritual Enemy.
He took the curses away from me. Was he Bob Larson? Because he can help you.
If your life isn't all that it should be, if relationships aren't working, If your health, your finances, or your spiritual life are unhappy, schedule a personal one-on-one encounter with me. We'll get to the root of the issues that are holding you back. We'll give you answers and a whole new direction in life.
Oh, what a change, what a difference when you have an encounter with God.
Take action. I look forward to seeing you soon.
And we're back on Stories of the Dark. I am Glen Clark, and that was Bob Larson, the exorcist, and he was talking about how can you tell the difference between mental illness and demonic possession. And also I need to stand corrected that September is National Suicide Prevention and Awareness Month, and we will be doing a program on that in the near future, and May is actually Mental Health Awareness Month, so thanks to BlakCircleGirl for correcting me on that one. So I think we're going to take a little break, play a little music, and I'll come back and I'll read some websites for you. So, Stories of the Dark, and I am Glen Clark, and we'll be right back. And welcome back to Stories of the Dark. I am your host, Glen Clark, and we are talking about mental health versus demonic possession. You may be wondering how the two go together. Well, in ancient times, and a lot of times doctors, even psychologists, would claim that somebody with mental illness was possessed by demons. So basically it's kind of your choice to differentiate between the two. Right now I want to read from psychologytoday.com, and talks about spirit possession and mental health. In many cultures, spirit possession is a way of explaining mental trauma. Even today, many cultures still believe that unusual behavior that may be symptomatic of mental health problems is caused by spirit possession. especially in some less developed areas of the world where such beliefs are still important features of the local culture. Interestingly, beliefs about spirit possession are not simply used to try to explain the effects of psychopathology-related experiences, but are also regularly used to control and coerce individuals. An interesting study, my internet is messing up here again, folks, so just bear with me. So I'm trying to get the page to load down. It doesn't want to. So, an interesting study by Neuner, Pfeffer, and it just decided it wanted to go blank on me. Isn't that interesting? Gotta love the internet sometimes. Okay, let's try this again. An interesting study by Neuner, Pfeffer, Schauser, Kaiser, Holden, a lot of names there, folks. In 2012, investigated the prevalence of Sen, a local variant of spirit possession, and use aged between 12 and 25 years in war-affected regions of northern Uganda. They compared youths who had been abducted and forced to fight as child soldiers and the so-called Lord's Resistance Army, a group that has waged a long and brutal campaign to overthrow the government of Uganda, with youths who had never been abducted. Sen is a form of spirit possession where the ghost of a deceased person visits the affected individual and replaces his or her identity. And Neuner reported that spirit possession was significantly higher in former abducted child soldiers than in non-abductees. They also found that reports of spirit possession were related to trauma exposure, such as sexual assault and being forced to kill, to psychological distress, and to higher rates of suicide and post-traumatic stress disorder. Neuner concluded that in many of the areas of the world where beliefs about spirit possession are widely held, such beliefs are a standard consequence of psychological trauma and may be a way of explaining dissociative symptoms that can often accompany intense traumatic experiences. These beliefs about spirit possession can then be used by various local agencies to manipulate the behavior of individuals, even to the extent of coercing them into acts of extreme brutality. Explanations of mental health problems in terms of possession have taken many forms over the course of history, and it is a form of explanation that has meant that many who have been suffering debilitating and distressing psychological problems have been persecuted and physically abused rather than offered the support and treatment they need. Many ancient civilizations, such as those in Egypt, China, Babylon, and Greece, believed that those exhibiting symptoms of psychopathology were possessed by bad spirits. This is known as demonology. And the only way to exorcise these bad spirits was with elaborate ritualized ceremonies that frequently involved direct physical attacks on the sufferer's body in an attempt to force out the demons through torture, flogging, or starvation. Not surprisingly, such actions usually had the effect of increasing the distress and suffering of the victim. In Western societies, demonology survived as an explanation of mental health problems right up until the 18th century, when witchcraft and demonic possession were common explanations for psychopathology. Nevertheless, as I have described above, demonic or spirit possession is still a common explanation for mental health problems in some less developed areas of the world. especially where witchcraft and voodoo are still important features of the local culture, such as Haiti and some areas of Western Africa. The continued adoption of demonic possession as an explanation of mental health problems, especially in relation to psychotic symptoms, is often linked to local religious beliefs. It may often be accompanied by exorcism as an attempted treatment, even in individuals with a known history of diagnosed psychotic symptoms. And that ends that from that once again was psychologytoday.com. You can have a look at that. I'll also have the links posted on the bottom of the video in the description, so you're welcome to check that out as well. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and take another little break, play some more music for you, and I'll come back and read. I have 2 more websites I want to share with you, so we'll be right back in just a few. I'm Glen Clark, and this is Stories of the Dark. welcome back to Stories of the Dark. I am your host, Glen Clark, and we are talking about mental illness versus demonic possession. And I want to read now from mentalillnesspolicy.org. Talks about how to differentiate demonic possession from schizophrenia. And this is written by Pastor Stephen Waterhouse. Pastor Stephen Waterhouse has written an excellent book called Strength for His People, a ministry for families of the mentally ill. It will be useful to those who have a devout belief in Catholicism and an interest in neurobiological disorders, formerly known as mental illness. The author's younger brother suffers from schizophrenia. The following is a paraphrasing of one chapter of the book that interests me. The arguments in the book are more solidly expressed than this abbreviation. Schizophrenia can strike anyone, including individuals from deeply religious homes. The concept of devils, heaven, and hell is part of Catholicism. Demonic influence is a rare but integral belief of many, and many Christians who research schizophrenia wonder about the demonic. Is my relative possessed? The New Testament mentions demons over 100 times, including Matt chapter 8 verse 29, Matt chapter 10 verse 1, and John 16 verse 11. Even those who have other beliefs or choose to remain skeptical still must relate to Christians who do not believe in the supernatural. Many Christians who endure a family member's battle with schizophrenia will have questions about demonic involvement with a loved one and deserve real answers instead of a condescending response which dismisses such concern as nonsense on the part of ignorant people. The Bible itself makes a distinction between disease and possession. Mark chapter 6 verse 13. Thus Christian theology should recognize the difference. At least 6 factors differentiate schizophrenia from demonic possession as described in the Bible. These factors can be helpful when trying to determine if an individual is possessed or has an NBD. These have helped me better understand my brother's illness. Attraction to versus aversion to religion. Demons want nothing to do with Christ. Conversely, people with NBD are also devoutly religious. Number 2, irrational speech versus rational speech. In New Testament accounts involving demons, the demons spoke in a rational manner. Untreated people with schizophrenia will often speak in nonsense and jump rapidly between unrelated topics. And I'm trying to get my page to scroll down here. Just wants to. Number 3, ordinary learning versus supernatural knowledge. Demons in the New Testament would speak through people to convey knowledge that otherwise could not have been known to possessed individuals. Those with NBD have no such ability to know facts which they have not acquired by normal learning. Number 4, normal versus occultic phenomena. There is an aspect to demon activity that is just plain spooky. Poltergeist, levitation, trances, and telepathy. These have an impact on others in the room, not just the possessed. With schizophrenia, the effect of the disorder is only on the disordered, not others. Number 5, the claim to be possessed. Authors who have clinical experience both with demon possession and mental illness believe those who claim to be possessed are very likely not possessed. Demons wish to be secretive and do not voluntarily claim to be present. Number 6, effects of therapy. If prayer solves the problem, then it was probably not schizophrenia. If medicine helps alleviate the problem, it was not demonic possession. And that again was mentalillnesspolicy.org. You're welcome to have a look at that. I'll also have the link posted on the description part of my YouTube channel. The last one here I want to read for you is, and it goes way back to back when mental illness was often cured with, or attempted to be cured rather, with lobotomies. In fact, I know not too long ago I listened to an edition of the Lore podcast, which I found fairly interesting. They actually talked about how when somebody just had symptoms of mental illness, they just gave them a lobotomy. Just take away part of their brain and be done with it. But in this day and age, of course, we don't do that. So this comes from Britannica.com. So this is about lobotomy. Lobotomy, also called prefrontal leucotomy, is a surgical procedure, in which the nerve pathways in the lobe or lobes of the brain are severed from those in other areas. The procedure formerly was used as a radical therapeutic measure to help grossly disturbed patients with schizophrenia, manic depression, and mania, bipolar disorder, and other mental illness. Evidence that surgical manipulation of the brain could calm patients first emerged in the late 1880s when Swiss physician Gottlieb Burckhardt, who supervised an insane asylum, removed parts of the brain cortex in patients suffering from auditory hallucinations and other symptoms of mental illness. Symptoms later defined medically as schizophrenia. Burckhardt performed his operation on 6 patients with the specific purpose not of returning the patients to a state of sanity, but of putting them into a state of calm. One of Burckhardt's patients died several days following the operation, and another later committed suicide, though it is unclear whether the suicide was associated with the surgery. However, several of the patients were easier to manage following the surgery. His idea for the operation had been influenced by the work. Looks like my website kind of messed up on me again, as usual. Alright, his idea for the operation had been influenced by the work of German physiologist Friedrich Goltz, who had performed a brain ablation, surgical removal of tissue, experiments on dogs, and observed distinct changes in the animal's behavior. In the decades following Burckhardt's work, there were few attempts at surgical disruption of the human brain. In 1935, however, American neuroscientists Carlisle F. Jacobson and John Fulton presented the results of an experiment involving frontal lobe ablation in chimpanzees. Prior to ablation, one of the animals would become agitated when it made an incorrect choice during a memory task. This response was eliminated by the operation. The other animal in the study experienced the opposite reaction. Having been relatively docile after ablation, it experienced agitation during task performance. Also in 1935, Portuguese neurophysician Antonio Egas Moniz headed a similar operation on a human. Moniz, who was affected by gout and could not use his hands to perform the surgery, enlisted the help of Portuguese surgeon Pedro Alameda, Lima. The surgery consisted of drilling 2 holes in the patient's head and then injecting pure ethyl alcohol into the prefrontal cortex. Alcohol was used to disrupt the neuronal tracts that were believed to give rise to and reinforce the recurrent patterns of thought observed in mentally ill patients. At the time, this first operation was considered a success, since there appeared to be a reduction in the symptoms of severe paranoia and anxiety that the patient had suffered prior to the surgery. Moniz and Lima subsequently performed the operation on a small subset of patients, refining the procedure as they went. Moniz created an instrument called a leucotome, designed specifically to disrupt the tracts of neuronal fibers connecting the prefrontal cortex and thalamus of the brain. Moniz and Lima operated on nearly 40 patients by 1937. However, the results were still mixed, with some patients improving and others showing no change in symptoms, and still others relapsing. Despite this, the practice was soon widely adopted, largely because there were few other therapeutic measures available at the time for quieting chronically agitated, delusional, self-destructive, or violent patients. The prefrontal leucotomy procedure, developed by Moniz and Lima, was modified in 1936 by American neurologists Walter J. Freeman II and James W. Watts. Freeman preferred to use the term lobotomy and therefore renamed the procedure prefrontal lobotomy. The American team soon developed the Freeman-Watts standard lobotomy, which laid out an exact protocol of how leucotome, in this case a spatula, was to be inserted and manipulated during the surgery. And continuing down, it shows a picture of Dr. Walter Freeman. And continuing on, the use of lobotomy in the United States was resisted and criticized heavily by American neurosurgeons. However, because Freeman managed to promote the success of the surgery through the media, lobotomy became touted as a miracle procedure, capturing the attention of the public and leading to an overwhelming demand for the operation. In 1945, Freeman streamlined the procedure, replacing it with transorbital lobotomy, in which a pick-like instrument was forced through the back of the eye sockets to pierce the thin bone that separates the eye sockets from the frontal lobes. The pick's point was then inserted into the frontal lobe and used to sever connections in the brain, presumably between the prefrontal cortex and thalamus. In 1946, Freeman performed this procedure for the first time on a patient who was subdued prior to the operation with electroshock treatment. It actually sounds very, very, very painful. I don't think I'd want anybody to go through that. And continuing on, the transorbital lobotomy procedure, which Freeman performed very quickly, sometimes in less than 10 minutes, was used on many patients with relatively minor mental disorders that Freeman believed did not warrant traditional lobotomy surgery, in which the skull itself was opened. A large proportion of such lobotomized patients exhibited reduced tension or agitation, but many also showed other effects such as apathy, passivity, lack of initiative, poor ability to concentrate, and a generally decreased depth of intensity of their emotional response to life. Some died as a result of the procedure. However, those effects were not widely reported in the 1940s. And at that time, long-term effects were largely unknown. Because the procedure met with seemingly widespread success, Moniz was awarded the 1949 Nobel Prize for physiology or medicine, along with Swiss psychologist Walter Rudolf Hess. Lobotomies were performed on a wide scale during the 1940s. Freeman himself performed or supervised more than 3,500 lobotomies by the late 1960s. The practice generally fell out of favor beginning in the mid-1950s, when antipsychotics, antidepressants, and other medications that were much more effective in treating and alleviating the distress of mentally disturbed patients came into use. Today, lobotomy is rarely performed. However, shock therapy and psychosurgery, the surgical removal of specific regions of the brain, occasionally are used to treat patients whose symptoms have resisted all other treatments. And it says on the bottom, you can learn more in these related Britannica articles. It talks about the human nervous system, mental disorder, development of physical and pharmacological treatments, and list goes on and on. So if you'd like to check that out, again, that's Britannica.com. And it looks like we've come to another end of this edition of Stories of the Dark. I'd like to give shout-outs to all my new followers, and thank you for following me on Twitter. You can also follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I have all the links to those on my Twitter account, and I also have I'll have links to those on my YouTube channel as well. Special thanks again to BlakCircleGirl for what she does, all the work she puts in, and developing of my YouTube channel, my SoundCloud, you name it, she's done it, and she even spends countless hours re-promoting all my stuff, and I certainly do appreciate that. So with that, we'll go ahead and end the program, and we'll see you on our next edition. I'm Glen Clark, and this is Stories of the Dark. Have a great night, everyone.